Yeah.
Today could well be my most important talk of 39 Ideas for Life. I'm talking to Fritzi Horstman about compassion and the importance of addressing and recognizing trauma. Fritzi is the founder of the Compassion Prison Project, with a mission to transform prisons into places that focus on education, mental health, and rehabilitation. She's also a filmmaker, known for the Grammy Award-winning documentary series, the four-part documentary, The Defiant Ones, about Jimmy Iovine. I'm always confused.
Jimmy Iovine.
That's it. And obviously Dr. Dre, who we all know. Iovine is more the man behind the scenes, but obviously in the documentary, it really brought to life about their relationship. Apart from this, Fritzi produced much more. And I think from the work, Fritzi, that I've seen of you, you're very able to vividly display the vulnerability and the human aspect in all of us, but also how we need one another. And I think I've seen that in a lot of your work. Thanks so much for being here with me. I'm honored to have your time and to talk to you and to pick your brain on compassion and addressing and recognizing trauma.
Oh, well, it's so great to be here. And Julius, I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Thank you. If I may, Fritzi, I'd like to start with a personal question. And I know about this to some extent, at least, because I've been watching your work. But could you please, in a nutshell, perhaps share your story and what got you started with the Compassion Prison Project?
Sure. In 2018, I read a book called The Body Keeps the Score. I was 56 years old, and I realized after reading that book changed my life, that my behavior wasn't who I was, that my outbursts, the way I dealt with my family, dealt with my friends, my coworkers, some of my curtness, some of my irritability had nothing to do with who I was. It was all because of my trauma.
Yeah.
And then a month later, I walked into a prison at Kern Valley State Prison. And I realized that if it's true for me, it's true for the people in prison. Their behavior isn't who they are. And I'm reading the Course in Miracles right now, and the Course in Miracles says there's nobody to forgive. God or the universe doesn't need to forgive anybody, because in the eyes of the universe, everybody is perfect. And we need forgiveness. Forgiveness is something we need so we can get to that realization. So when I walked into prison, not only did I felt like they needed to be forgiven, but also needed to be seen for who they are.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's missing in our criminal justice system. We're not looking for the human in them. We're looking at what they did, and we're only focused on what they did. But if you focus on me, when I've yelled at my child, is that who I am? Well, to me, that's a crime. That's a crime. But it's something that's from my behavior, and it's not who I am. So my request to everybody is, let's look at the person. Let's not look at the crime.
Yeah.
And not to diminish what the victims have gone through. And actually, we also have to look at the victims and say, what happened? How are you doing? What's happening? How are you dealing with, this change in your life? Because it's traumatic for them too. We're creating more trauma.
Yeah.
But my focus right now is on the people in prison and healing them so they can return to society and not create more victims.
Yeah.
But we have to look at the whole picture. We cannot isolate the one event that got them arrested and put into prison.
Yeah. For the people who are not familiar with Compassion Prison Project, could you share a bit more? What is it exactly?
Well, our mission is to transform prisons our mission is to create trauma-informed prisons and communities. If I don't start with the right word, I always mess it up. And trauma-informed means you understand that the likelihood of someone in prison, they're traumatized, and what is, and understanding what happens to the brain, body, and spirit when it's traumatized, why people that are traumatized are in fight or flight, and the understanding that when you're in fight or flight, you don't have access to the part of the brain that makes you human.
Yeah.
The part of the brain that makes you human is the prefrontal cortex. And if you don't have access to that, you can't learn, you don't understand consequences, you don't have empathy, because the only thing you're wired for when you're in fight or flight is survival.
Yeah.
And making sure the other person is wrong, making sure the other person is punished. This is what our criminal justice system is based on. And I would argue that the criminal justice system, at least in the United States, is in a state of fight or flight, because we haven't gotten to the part of us that makes us human. And once we start calming down and stop like fighting and punishing, we start seeing the human element. And you know, when we walk in the street every day, we have a choice to see somebody as a threat or as you know, part of us, part of who we are.
Yeah.
And in every moment you can see somebody as a threat. And you know, there's a book written by Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry called What Happened to You? And it is a plea to all the medical establishments, instead of saying what's wrong with you, is saying what happened to you. And that is my plea as well, is what happened to me. It's not the school to prison pipeline, it's the trauma to prison pipeline. And when you're traumatized, you don't understand, you can't save for retirement when you're traumatized. You don't, you know, my sister who's traumatized, she goes out, I sent her a lot of money and she just went and spent it all. And she's like, I had to spend it. I'm like, no, you could have taken yourself to the dentist, you could have gone to the vet, but she didn't have that because she was in fight or flight. And so, you know, you see people that win the lottery sometimes and they go through it. Why? Because they're not in a place where they're calm and, you know, say, okay, what can I do here? What can I do? So it's not being in a state of panic, stressed out, like, and we're all stressed out in our society. I mean, you know, today Putin's going to war with the Ukraine, you know, what is that? Why is he, you know, and, you know, I would argue that he's in some kind of, he must have some brain problem. He must have something really wrong with his brain to need to have power over so many people and to need to be able to dehumanize, is it 400 million? I don't know how many million people that are in Ukraine, but to be able to dehumanize to that extent, there has to be something really wrong with your brain.
Yeah, I think what you said about society and the legal system not the legal system, but the prison system in the United States, to be in a constant state of tension. Also the whole policing, we see this more and more in the world, I think. And what you mentioned is the calmness for us to be able to relax. You spoke about the consequence for the victims. I think when we can achieve something like this with the people who have committed the crimes, it will also in turn help the victims by potentially reaching some more understanding on the human side of the elements in the trauma that caused or in part contributed to those events taking place. And I think that, the relaxation of it is a very important part. And it's something that I've seen also in your Step Inside the Circle recording. And I think it beautifully articulated this. And in this, you invited 235 incarcerated men to join in a compassion trauma circle. And I've seen it now a few times, and I cannot watch it without being touched and actually having tears, just by seeing, even now by talking about it, by seeing that. And what I believe happens there is that people they're offered a means to express this pent-up trauma, this pent-up tension, and to release it. And what happens is actually amongst each other, they are being seen, they're being heard, they're being felt and loved, and in cases understood, you know, and for many of these people, it's even the first time in a long time that something like that has been experienced. a universal human need is finally met in this event that you've organized. And so I'd love to ask you the following: can you share more about this process and what makes it so incredibly powerful?
I think the power lies in the secrecy, the wall of secrecy that's being lifted, the prison of secrecy that we're all in. I grew up, I have, that circle is based on adverse childhood experiences quiz. And I'm just going to go through the 10 top ones that are in that quiz, that circle. We had 20 events in that circle, but the top 10 are physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, emotional neglect, physical neglect, parent or caregiver addicted to drugs or alcohol, parent or caregiver mentally ill, suicidal, or depressed, domestic violence, parents divorced or separated, and a household member going to prison. Yeah. So I have 8 of those. So I was hiding the shame of, having my father be an alcoholic, the shame of my mother being mentally ill, the shame of being beaten every day, debased verbally by my mother all the time, not feeling loved, and I go to school with these other middle class children. Actually, they were more middle class than I was, and they were more regulated. They had more of their needs met, more of their emotional needs met. I remember at one point my mother was very had racist tendencies. She grew up in the South, and she would talk about African Americans and Jews, even though ironically she's half Jewish. So, at one point I was in school and I saw myself saying Heil Hitler. And, I think about it now because it was a heated conversation. And, I know about the atrocities of Hitler, and I know, and I knew, and my best friend is Jewish, and I'm a quarter Jewish. So, but I actually didn't know that at that moment. Yeah. I didn't know I was a quarter Jewish. But that tendency of a traumatized child, because that's what I was, that is a sign for any teacher, for anybody. If a child is othering anyone, there's something wrong going on at home, because my mother was othering me. I was being othered. Yeah. And that's what bullying is. That's what all these groups are. And I would propose that all these racialized groups, the people that want to be, that feel that us and them is important, is what's the trauma? Where is the childhood trauma? What was done to you that you feel like you need to have power and authority and dominance over another group? What happened to make you feel that way? And I think if we get to that in every one of us, I think it's going to be a big wake-up call, because everybody's traumatized. It's clear. It's clear. What goes on the news, what goes in our Congress, in our Senate, Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer, and just everybody, they're walking around like ghosts. Like they're like, where is the soul? Where is your soul? What happened to your soul? Because your soul's not showing up in that congressional room.
Yeah, I think that's what you're saying. We all have a soul, but many people keep it locked inside of a steel cage, and they don't show it at all, and they don't allow anyone to even shed a tiny bit of light on it. And I think that's really what's causing all this tension, and it's an accelerating downward spiral. One of the incarcerated men, actually 72 years old, who took part in Step Inside of the Circle, he mentioned that experience was one of the best days of his life at 72 years old. Why do you
76. He was 76.
Oh, 76 even.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think he said that?
That's
caused him to say that?
That's interesting. Yes. I think first of all, we brought treats. So we brought as much goodness that we could on both days. We bought donuts and chips. I wanted to bring pizza. I would have bought pizza for everybody, but they were like, no, just snacks. I'm like, okay. So we brought oranges and chips for the first day, and donuts, which I know isn't good to give to the body, but you know, why not? When you're in prison, why not bring them luxuries that they're yearning for?
Yeah.
So we brought them treats on both filming days, and I think it's also to be recognized in a group that you're important, you matter, that you're valuable, your opinion matters. That,
Yeah.
and I think that's the power of the group. But having it filmed, I think, is an extra level. It takes it to another level. And also, I think just having a woman being sympathetic to these men, you know, I opened my heart to them. And that's the thing, is I open my heart to everyone as much as I can, as much as my ego will get out of the way so I can love them.
Yeah. Well, I think I did quite a bit of research on vulnerability. I even taught it in university. And what I think you did there is you led by example, and I've seen you in the material, I've seen you be vulnerable yourself, and by that, you kind of legitimize and invite other people to do the same. And so I think you had a leading role in that sense, maybe even as a woman, to be there amidst these men and to still open up and to take the lead. And I think it allowed a lot of them to do the same, at least from what we could see from the material.
Yeah, yes. And I also, you know, I was on their side, but just to be clear, I'm not against the officers. I'm on their side too. I created the Compassion Prison Project, not the Compassion Prisoner Project.
Yeah.
Everybody needs empathy. Everybody needs to be seen. Everybody needs to be part of the community. And that's the thing, is prisons are structured to be us versus them.
Yeah.
I'm on a Facebook group called Correctional Lives Matter, and I get to see the othering that they do on a daily basis. But part of that is because they're, you know, the numbers are, you know, it's sometimes there's 2 officers to 100 or 200 men. So they're outnumbered. And so they're in a state of fight or flight their entire time. And when you're in fight or flight, you're prone to othering. You're prone to seeing everyone as the enemy. And, you know, we need to get out of fight or flight, because we're not in a place where we're making good decisions. We've stopped making good decisions. One of my colleagues and I she kind of reacted strongly, and it put me in a state of fight or flight the other day. Yeah. And she was trying to talk, and it's like, you know what? I can't understand you right now. And that's the thing, you know, being able to express yourself, but also to understand what people are saying goes out the window.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things. Because of what? Because
of tension that we build up.
Well, because of the stress, but the prefrontal cortex isn't working, isn't online. And that's one of the other things that we're making people aware of is traumatic brain injury. 80 up to 87% of the people in prison have traumatic brain injury. And when the prefrontal cortex, it's mostly injury to the frontal lobe and the prefrontal cortex. And if that's damaged, the aggression goes up, the anger goes up. And sometimes people can't understand what the officer is saying. So if you can't comply with orders because you don't understand what the officer is saying, it can be seen as defiance. And you can get into a whole mess of trouble. Yeah. And so this awareness about brain injury, which is basically what childhood trauma does and what traumatic brain injury does, that's like the focus of what we're expressing, what we want to get. That's the message we want to get to everybody in prison. Yeah. Yeah. The administrators and the people that live there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think this trauma awareness is really something that's lacking, and also how trauma is passed on through generations. Mm-hmm. I think that one of the aims, if I can interpret it, Step Inside the Circle aims to shed light on the prevalence of this childhood trauma, because a lot of the individuals there, they all had these childhood experiences that shaped them later on, and even from past generations, which trauma was passed on. Why is it important to shed light on this? And can you also perhaps tell more about this in light of what Dr. Gabor-Mate said in relation to this, because what he said is that when studying prison populations, you see a common preponderance of childhood trauma and mental illness, is what he said. And basically, the two go together, and what you see in prison is the traumatized part of society.
Most traumatized members of our society.
Yes.
That's right. And awareness is so important. Awareness is so key, because you can't heal what you don't know you have. If you don't know, and I hear it again and again from the men and mostly men right now. I hope to work in women's prisons soon, but again and again, they're telling me, I had no idea I was traumatized. I didn't know that violence was not an acceptable way to behave. They, people say violence, I thought violence was normal. I thought it was normal to beat up to beat up my wife. That's what I was shown. So people in prison don't have role models, don't have examples of what, I don't know if that's normal or what, let's call it regulated. Let's call it positive influence, not living in fear, living in grace, living in love, living in connection. They didn't know that that's something that's available. So, we're punishing people for not knowing. And it's not like, they have no idea that this is an option. And you talk about generational trauma. This has been handed down for the African-American communities, but also the slave owning communities. Yeah. Because what you do to others, you do to yourself. So if you're whipping a slave, you're brutalizing yourself. And what does it take in your soul to do this to people? Just because you think you have the right to dominate somebody. So, the South is riddled with abuse, generational abuse, because of the shame of what they're doing. They know, we all know deep down that treating anyone badly is wrong. Yeah. And it's treating yourself wrong, but we know it's deeply, deeply wrong. Yeah. And so we have to also, there's a thing called moral injury. And that's what war does. That's what child abuse does. Yeah. That's what police brutality does. That's all moral injury. And the humans that commit these atrocities have to deal with the moral injury, even if they see it and don't say anything. That's a moral injury. And what happens, this is one of the symptoms of moral injury, is there becomes a lack of empathy if it's done too often. Yeah. But it's definitely a crisis of the soul. And I would argue that our planet is having a crisis of the soul, and it's showing up in our global warming, if that's what's happening, in the way we treat our rivers and our forests and our poor people. It's a crisis of the soul. And I think to justify the things that have been done to our planet has to really have affected the people that have done it. To turn a blind eye to polluting people's water systems, to causing cancer, to destroying houses in neighborhoods so they can build roads, whatever you think is justifiable, you have to turn yourself off. And one of the symptoms of trauma, and that's traumatic, doing something traumatic to somebody is traumatic. You have to, we have a numb society. We see atrocities every day now, and the system just cannot deal with it, and you can't deal with it. So we turn off, we numb, we watch Netflix, we drink, bars. Yeah. Pardon?
I said we distract ourselves so we don't have to deal with the difficult parts.
Exactly. Yeah. And the thing is, we're human and we're here. The reason we're here is because we have to deal with the difficult parts. Yeah. That's our work. Yeah. And, if we're not doing the work, I'll watch Netflix myself, but I spend all day working on this, and this is my work, but I also work on myself. I'm also really becoming really aware of, why am I violent? Where am I violent in my life? Just the little things, like my dog barks sometimes, like incessantly, and it triggers me, and I'll just yell at him. And my son said to me, he says, "You're treating violence with violence, Mom." I was like, whoa, good for me. I've raised a son who can see this, but also he's right. And, you know, what am I doing about my own violence? My own, you know, I'll look at somebody's outfit and have something critical come up in my head. That's violence. And I'm sorry, you know, weight shaming or whatever it is. It's like, wait a second, see behind that person. It's true for all of us. It's not what's wrong with this person that they're overweight. It's what happened to them. And I would argue they probably have been sexually abused or bullied. And this is how they cope. So bravo for them coping. And, you know, that's where the compassion, that's where I ask, is that we have compassion for one another. And a lot of these survival strategies will go away if we don't abuse each other.
Yeah, I think the important part here is to recognize that we all, in more or less extent, face trauma, and we have dealt with trauma that has been passed on to us, to also, less or more extent. And it's in the here and now, in the present moment, that it's up to us to break the chain. And what I have witnessed as just an observer from your material and from your work is a part of that chain is being broken by what you do. For instance, with Step Into the Circle. Also, I think your awareness that you share with yourself about yourself, you know, with regard to shouting at the dog. I mean, even being able to recognize it as such means that there's work that has been done. So what have you learned about this process of breaking this cycle and breaking this chain, both personally from your own experience, but also through your work? And you already mentioned it. What would be the role of compassion in this regard?
Yes. Breaking the chain, the first point of contact is awareness, is really understanding. And the first time I took an ACE quiz, I thought I had 4. And that kind of shows you, you know, you really have to take a look at those questions. And I finally broke it down. It's like, yes, I didn't think my mother was mentally ill. It's like, yes. And my father, you know, they were both living in a fog. So, you know, I remember asking my mom, you know, telling my mom I don't feel loved. And she says, "Oh, that's silly." But if a child doesn't feel loved, then that's a level of neglect. And again, not to shame the parents, because the parents are doing the best they can. And I really want to be very clear about here. I'm not about here making parents wrong. I'm here spreading awareness so parents can know that their behavior is injuring their child's brain. And so there's a big, you know, we want to punish. It's like, no, this is awareness and this is compassion. Sorry about my dog.
No, that's all right. Don't worry. I know who it is because I've seen his picture on your website. So
oh yeah.
Good relation.
Yeah, Rocco.
Yeah.
It's important that awareness is the first step to this. And once we're aware, that awareness allows compassion to come through, because then suddenly you see that little child that was abused, that was being hurt by your mother or your father, and you have compassion for that little child. And that changes how you relate to the world, because if you are suddenly having compassion for yourself, because I would argue until you know you're traumatized, you're really mortified by your behavior. You're like, there's something wrong with me. You know, I cannot control myself. And you don't know where it's coming from, which is true with me. It's like, why am I so mean? Why am I yelling my head off at the driver who just cut me off? This all just comes out of the blue, and you just like, what the hell's wrong with me? Well, there's nothing wrong with me. I've been traumatized, and something happened to me, and my brain got injured. And so when I learned I was traumatized, it gave me the ability to really be compassionate with myself, and to just say, hey, you've had a hard road, Fritzi. And and, I walk into a prison and like, I may have had a hard road that's nothing compared to the road these men have traversed.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
And to see them. And I think that's one of the things is I see that.
Yeah.
I see their trauma, and I see how, number one, how hurt they are, but also how incredible they are.
Yeah.
But that's for everybody. Today I just looked at an op-ed in the New York Times by Ezra Klein talking about people, how the US is creating starvation in Afghanistan. And I saw a little baby starving, and I thought, this divine human is probably here to teach us. That's probably what this divine human came in to do, is to show us what we're doing. And I just scrambled. It's like, how can I send money, or what can I do? But I saw the starvation, but then I also saw the divine human, and that's our jobs as we evolve together, is to see the divinity in each of us, and really to see the divinity in ourselves.
But in order to do so, as you mentioned, we need to have this awareness. And if you're constantly in this flight or flight mode, this fight or flight mode, how can we? What is the trigger to get us out and to become aware? I guess, and maybe I'd like to offer a suggestion. What I'm observing and what I'm also experiencing, I guess what we need to feel as human beings is the need to feel seen and heard, and just being acknowledged. And I think that's also what happened. And you mentioned the donuts and that the camera crew was there. I mean, this was also a validation of their importance, and they were seen not only amongst each other, but it was indeed more empowering for them that this was there for them in addition. So I guess, but how can we do this? How can we do this as a part of breaking the cycle?
Well, but one other element in that circle is they were in a circle.
Yeah.
And the key about being in a circle is you instead of, being in like a classroom setting, you're seeing everyone, you're being seen. And so we created a curriculum, Trauma Talks curriculum. And the idea is you watch the video we create, and then you sit in circle and you talk about what you've experienced and learned. And so I would say being in community is one of the most important things we can do to heal ourselves. So we get the thing, it's called serve and return, which is what mothers do for babies when they're, the baby smiles and the mother smiles.
Yes.
The baby goes, ooh, 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 and the mother goes, ooh, ooh, ooh. And then, so it validates the child, and it shows the child that it's being seen.
Yeah.
And that wires the brain. We are social animals. Yeah. So prisons don't work because we've isolated them. We isolate people in prison, and then suddenly they, left alone with your own thoughts, will all go insane. Seriously. Yeah. Have you ever been with your own thoughts for a few hours? It's crazy.
I've tried, yes.
But then you talk to someone and they're like, oh, no, that's, you're really off base. Or yes, but, think about this. And we need other people. We are wired to be human. I mean, to be connected. And, the pandemic has really messed up all of us. Even me, I'm getting a little agoraphobic. I'm like, I don't know if I want to be in with all those people. Yeah. And that's what happens when you put people in solitary. Yeah. And in death row, which is a lot like solitary.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what you say about being in community as a critical element to this is very important. And I have a question in relation to this, and it's a big question, but I'll ask it nonetheless. Because I think we as people in general, maybe not as people in general, but in today's society, we're almost taught to be very occupied with our own lives. And that obviously goes counter against being compassionate in individuals, but also becoming more compassionate as a society. And also to become more trauma informed as a society, because we're all just occupied with our own little island. So how can we stimulate this being in community, and where can we start as individuals? I'd love to hear some thoughts on this. I'm sure you have.
That's such a good idea. I mean, for those of us, AA, I don't know, you don't have to be an alcohol. Well, I don't think AA is for everybody, but if you have drinking problems, if you are, even if you're drinking 2 or 3 times a week, what is it that the alcohol is doing that you can't do for yourself? So, I mean, I would say coffee. What is the coffee doing that that your body isn't going to give you? I mean, I love coffee, believe me, but I stopped it because I knew it kept me hypervigilant. It kept me in a state of hyper awareness, so that to keep my body on guard. So it actually kept me closer to being in fight or flight than it did being regulated. But finding community, I mean, community gardens, my son goes to these youth and government meetings. I would say, get yourselves involved, Rotary, whatever. We need it though. We need it. And I'm guilty as charged. I have been isolated from communities most of my life. And so I don't even know how to do that. I do have a community meeting, which is in an hour and a half from now. So we do, but it's on Zoom. But so that's one of the things we're doing. And I forgot that's, and it's a way we all do feel connected by the end of the time. Everybody's really kind of much happier. Our spirits are much more lifted because it's a place to be seen and see.
Yeah, the being seen and heard part is so critically important. And also, I think to be able to be vulnerable and to show that part of yourself that you're not comfortable to show, or that you feel shame about, for instance, I think that's we'll get to that actually, question about that. Before I go there, there's a lot written on self-compassion. And I think obviously the work starts with ourselves. Before we can be compassionate of other people, the same with love. Before we can love someone else, we have to love ourselves. We have to be compassionate of ourselves. And we've talked about, sorry.
I think that could happen at the same time though. I don't think it's like, you have to spend 4 years being self-compassionate and then you can love somebody. I walked into prison and I hadn't done all the work on myself, but I could see that they were my brothers.
Yeah, well, it's probably a very good addition. It's probably mutually reinforcing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But it's the walk into the community, be exposed to people.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's really important. And that was my question about to do this together in community with other people.
However it can work. Yes. Or just have a party, have a gathering, and talk about, get together and talk about childhood trauma, get together and talk about, how we can help other people. There's nothing more exhilarating than knowing you're going to help somebody. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, how, my heart expands just thinking about it. Like, oh my God, I'm going to go to prison in a couple of weeks if they let me. And just to see them and to be able to just give them love is just, it's, that's what creates the fullness in the soul, not the new outfit, not the new car, not the new house.
Definitely.
And I think we're all, because we're so traumatized, we've been programmed to think that material things and money is going to fill that void. And the thing that fills it, and I can tell you 100%. Well, it's a distraction, and it's also, it's temporary. It's great that, you get the new car for a day, and then the next day you're like, okay, this is my car. And then nothing, it doesn't do what you think it's going to do. And so the thing that does what you want it to do is being with other people, giving to other people, listening to other people. But it's also putting away your phones, because
being in the now.
Yes. And the thing about the now, if you can be in the now, the past doesn't exist. And the past is where all the fear, we've been programmed, is where all the fear comes from. So if you can actually be in this moment, is there anything wrong? You may have a grievance against somebody, but what is that? That's in the past. Do you still love that person? Yes, I would say, yes, I still love that person. What about the grievance from the past? Well, that doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. So now you can start a whole nother, a whole new pathway, a whole neural pathway, and a pathway in your life that no longer has grievance.
Yeah.
But you have to live in the present moment. Yeah. And it's, I keep hearing, the power of now. And it's, I'm kind of starting to get it now, but it never really made sense to me, but there is nothing but this moment, right?
Yeah. Well, and as you already said, when you are in the now, there is simply no space for grievance, because if there would be, you wouldn't be in the now. It's really
right.
simple as that.
Or space for fear about what's about to happen.
Exactly. Yeah. That's actually putting you in the future, and the grievance is taking you to the past.
Exactly. Yeah. And from based on my past and based on my life, things work out. And sometimes my bank account gets to a point where I'm like, oh, don't know, this is looking scary. Yeah. But then I remind myself, it's like, you know what, things work out.
Yeah, we're like a cat will drop on our feet.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are some, I will say, for some people it hasn't worked out. And that's why they're in a state of fight or flight. And that's why we need to we have to see people where they're at. There's that thing, give a person a fish and they'll come back, teach them to fish. But in our society, we don't have any fishing teachers. I don't know, how are we going to teach people to fish if they're traumatized and no one's teaching them how to fish?
Yeah, I have a very fitting question, I think, relating to this. In the wisdom of trauma, and that's actually how I learned about you the first time. Dr. Gabor, he argues that the deepest pain is actually the doorway to healing. And I think also this is in a way what you do with Compassion Prison Project, is that you allow people to go there to the pain instead of just having it tucked away in this metal cage, but you actually allow them to go there, to be vulnerable, to acknowledge this part of trauma, in the case of your setting, even publicly amongst others. And through that, this brings people together, and it helps them move through the pain and hurt collectively, but also individually. And I think the experience of shame has a lot to do with that, of letting go of the shame. And because I think shame is part of that steel cage that we keep our things inside. So can you share more about this element of shame and why we need to break through the shame to kind of move through the pain and the old trauma?
Absolutely. It's such a great question, but I want to just go back to one thing you said about people are working on their deepest wounds. What we do is we are not therapists. So we're not we're not carving in there deeply. We're creating an awareness. Yeah. Okay. And it's a big difference because I'm just saying this because we're not therapists, and I'm not a therapist. And to do that in that public space could really trigger people. So what we're doing, I just want to be really clear, because that work is available to them, though. What has happened is an awareness has come, but also an awareness is that you were a little beautiful boy and your mother destroyed you. But your mother was also destroyed, and her mother was destroyed, etc. But you were perfect. You are perfect. And you have been carrying around the shame. So what trauma does is it tells you that it separates you from yourself and from your community. And it tells you that something is wrong with you. Something is terribly wrong with you. And it's repeated on a daily basis when you're hit, that's a betrayal by your parents. When you're verbally assaulted, that's a betrayal by your parents. Some parents have let their children be raped by their fathers or their stepfathers or uncles or whatever. And they won't do anything about it because they're afraid of whatever will happen. But that's a betrayal. Yeah. When you don't protect your child, that's a betrayal. Yeah. And so this information gets passed on energetically to the child that they are not They are not good. They're not okay. And ultimately it leads to hopelessness, which is a recipe for crime. It's and I was a little juvenile delinquent myself. I was getting into all kinds of shenanigans because no one seemed to care about me when I was a little girl. You know, my mother was beating me. She was telling me I was a whore. She was telling me I was, you know, I rue the day you were born, she says to me. Things like that tell the child they're no good.
Yeah.
And one of the guys that I worked with, he wrote to me, he said, you know, I didn't care if I lived or died, Fritzi. I would walk into neighborhoods where I know I would get killed. I didn't care. And I would do things I just didn't care. And, you know, I always say the most dangerous person on earth is a young man without hope.
Yeah.
And so what happens is it's this built-in shame. We build in this shame, that the shame that I am worthless. I have no value. I don't mean anything.
Yeah. Or there's something wrong with me, or what I've done instead of what happened to me. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something wrong with me. And, you know, when we go in there now, we bring signs that say you matter. We have volunteers hold up signs that say you matter. And that changes that. Even it might seem like trivial, but to have someone standing there saying you matter is someone standing there for you. Someone is saying, bullshit. This cage that you're living in is baloney, excuse my language.
Yeah.
And that gets transferred to them. They get that message. And I don't know why it worked, but it did. I try all kinds of things. We keep doing circles. The circle we're going to do next is when they walk out of the circle, they're going to start walking out of the circle, walking towards their new reality, which is no longer being damaged, but being perfect. We're still working that one out, but I'm going to be going to Scotland in a couple of months to do circles in 4 different prisons. And I'm really looking forward to that. And and I'm hoping, you know, I want to go, we're supposed to go to Nebraska. The possibilities to bring, you know, every man or woman that I get to meet and touch and let them know that they're not what they've been told, that they're not the shameful humans that they've been told.
That they've been sold, even, because I think it's not telling people have sold them onto this idea, which is, yeah, we're all human beings under all. Yeah.
Well, but you know, if you stop and look at a tree for a second, you take that tree in, that tree is magnificent. That tree is something else. It's just the way its leaves go, just all of it, all of the things in the tree, or a bird or a human.
Yeah.
Every one of us is a miracle, every single one, even if they're deformed, even if they have Down syndrome, even if they're 2 feet tall. I saw a short person the other day, and they were a miracle. It's like, what are we doing? Turning a blind eye to the miracles we get to see every day, every person, every flower, every song, all of it, everything we're creating. What are we doing? Like spending time hurting each other.
Yeah, and for that, in order to see that, we need this awareness and the presence to be able to see it. Yeah.
Well, I guess, or we could just say, hey, wait, I'm going to go look at the tree today. I'm going to see what that tree's all about. Or I'm going to
curiosity.
Well, but just, you know, maybe just you listening to me say this might spark somebody to say, okay, I'm going to go see this person that I have this grudge against, and see them as a miracle instead of as a pain in the neck.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are people I don't want to talk to. I mean, there are people I just, you know, I'd rather not spend my time because for whatever reason, they haven't worked on themselves or whatever, they're pulling my energy down. But they're still a miracle. I'm not going to deny them that. You know, I mean, you know, I have to have my own life and say no to things. Otherwise, forget it.
Yeah.
But they are a miracle. I'm thinking of one person right now who drives me nuts, but she's a miracle, you know, and her journey and how she's grown and what she's done. I don't want to take that away from her. I want to love her for what she is. Just don't call me. Sorry.
Maybe she just triggers you too much, and there's a part in you which you haven't completed yet, or free.
100%, for sure. You're right. And there is work there. There is work to do. I don't want to do it today, but I will do it.
Yeah,
I gotta
sure.
do that.
Not
I
everything
gotta
at
do
the
that
same
work.
time. Yeah.
No.
Fritzi, what
I'm-
could people do to bring more compassion into their lives, into their surroundings, and what could they do to support the Compassion Prison Project and your work?
Well, I would start with myself and just, stop the violence to myself. Stop it today. You are perfect. Look at yourself in the mirror and just tell yourself that. I'm working with a man. He's very, very, very mentally ill in Florida, and he cuts himself and he, hurts himself all the time. And I say to him every day, tell yourself how beautiful you are, 10 times today. So start getting used to the idea that you're a miracle. It's just true. Yeah. And anything else is a lie. Anything you tell yourself is a lie, and it's fear-based, and it's based on old programming. And, I would say this is new programming, but it's really just true. And so, you're lying to yourself, and it's not true, full stop. You may have done some crappy things. Well, stop doing them. Yeah. Let's just, just stop doing them. And the past is the past. We don't have to think about that anymore, like I said. And let's get busy. Let's get busy creating a new world, creating the world that we should be living in, which is a world that doesn't have poverty, a world that doesn't have fear, that doesn't have war. We're all creating this war. This is our war. This isn't just over in the Ukraine. This is our war. We have whatever we've done. I take responsibility for this war, because this is still the violence that's within us. If we didn't have any violence in us, that war would not be able to start, because all those soldiers would be like, you know what, I'm not doing that.
Not taking part, yeah. Because
I don't believe in othering. So, have you othered somebody today? Have you, I don't care what your political views are, but if you don't agree with somebody and you other them, then you're contributing to the violence. You are part of the violence. So, and anything that dominates somebody is violent. Any dominance is violence. And so, what are you dominating? What are you trying to win? What are you trying to overrule?
What are you trying to compensate?
Yes. What poison are you putting into your body today? That's violence. Carolyn Mace, she says, if I make myself a promise and I don't fulfill my promise to myself, like, I'm going to make my bed today, and if I don't do it, then that's a betrayal. You've betrayed yourself. It's just a little thing, but these little microaggressions.
No, it's a very good point. Yeah.
But
we have to do what we say we will do. It's very important.
Well, have integrity. Have integrity with yourself. That's so important. But then there's also micro compassions, pick yourself, get a flower for yourself and give it to you. Love yourself, treat yourself and take care of yourself. Self-care, that's like the buzzword, but nobody does it. Take care of yourself, because if you take care of yourself, you'll be in your cortex, and then the whole world
spill over to other people.
They're like, what happened to you? Well, I'm in my cortex. And we have a t-shirt right now. We just created t-shirts that say, get to the cortex. And so I think it starts with us. If we want to change the world, it starts with us. But really, Julius, you said you had trauma. What trauma did you have growing up? I mean, and if you don't want to share it, that's fine. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you want to share.
I think we all have our traumas and our experiences that have shaped us in good and bad ways. I prefer not to go into it now
Okay.
at the end of this talk, but I was actually thinking that since you're coming to Scotland, because my question, that's the part you didn't answer, is how can people, what can they do to support the Compassion Prison Project? And you haven't answered that, but what I was thinking to ask you on, if you need help in Scotland in one way or another, we're much closer, me being in Holland, you being the US. So if there's anything I could do, be happy to help or take part in some way or another. So
wonderful. And,
yeah.
you know, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I just wanted to say that there's something there. There's some shame there that's holding this in place. And so, you know, tell somebody you haven't told one day, and be vulnerable, because when you release that, when you release the shame and the notion that you have to be secretive about what happened to you.
Well, yeah, that's actually been a huge eye opener. The whole arena of vulnerability, and to show yourself. So we've talked about being seen and seeing other people, but also allowing yourself to be seen. It's been a huge shift in my life, where I allow myself to be seen. Actually, this whole project of 39 Ideas for Life is in part also about that. And what keeps coming back also in my research, and that's why it's also interesting, I hear this also while talking with you, is that a lot of this comes back to tension that we hold, where we cannot relax and let go. We're in this fight or flight mode, constantly holding tension. And once we can relax, we can also arrive in the here and now, in the present moment. And then, yeah, move through certain things. I mean, there's a lot of, yeah, I invite you to go scroll down to the previous post. I've researched the presence, breathing, a ton of topics that help with being in the present, and also help with, also did research on vulnerability for this project.
Yes, and the shame, you're holding, there's something you're holding in your body that your mind and your soul knows it's fine, but your mind doesn't think so. Your ego wants to have you look a certain way.
Yeah.
And the way you really look is how you are, is everything that happened to you, and everything that happened to you is perfect. Everything you needed, and for me too, I needed my mother to abuse me. I wouldn't be doing this work. Yeah. So it was perfect, but everything that happened to you has made up you. Yes. And there's no shame in any little iota of Julius. Every molecule, every event is perfect, perfect. And I don't judge it. I don't judge it. And when you're ready, let's do another conversation. We'll talk about your trauma. Because
I appreciate you saying it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. And that's the work though, Julius. That's what's standing between you and understanding how perfect you are. Right there. That right there is what's holding you hostage. Yeah. You are incarcerated by your past. And
yeah, that's a very good point. I think, and I've looked into this actually. We have a lot of stories we tell ourselves when we grow up, and a lot of these stories actually, they're no longer relevant and they're no longer up to date, but we do, if we're not present enough, continue to carry those forward. And I know that I do that, and by that I keep old things alive, which are no longer part of me. And I know other people do this too. And I mean, I like some of the people that are in your part of your circles, they have experienced very different things than I have, but everyone has an element of this. Yeah.
We all do. But remember what I said, the past is no longer true. It's
right. It's not
relevant. It is not in this now. In this now, you know, I was an abused child, but I'm also a magnificent woman.
Yes.
And what I gather now from my past is fuel to end child abuse.
Yes.
That's it. Yeah. So if your listeners want to find out more about our organization, we're at compassionprisonproject.org. Yeah. And we also have a podcast there as well. And also like and subscribe to the podcast if you can. And also take a look at Step Inside the Circle, which is on the website, and share that with your
Yeah, definitely. I'll be
friends.
putting all the links in the
Awesome.
post and also under the YouTube video and in the podcast.
Awesome.
Last question, and I like to close with this question, and it's an important question. What question did I not ask about compassion or recognizing trauma, which I should have asked? Is there one angle that I missed? Because obviously I didn't ask all the questions, but is there something that I completely overlooked that we didn't touch upon that you think is important to address?
No, I honestly think you did a pretty excellent job. I mean, I go to these interviews a lot, and I was like, whoa, he's really got his act together. I guess I would just say, in addition, is we're here to do the work. This is why we're here.
Yeah.
And there's no time like right now to just face it and go to therapy, get into groups, but take care of yourself and really start looking at, is this the person I want to be? Am I still being violent? Am I still being mean to myself? Am I still holding myself back?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, why? And what can we do? Because when you change yourself, you change the world 100%. And so we're counting on you. We're waiting on you to change. We're waiting on you to let go of your shame from the past. We're waiting for that, because when you do, that gives permission to other people to do it. And, there were a couple guys in Step Inside the Circle who didn't get enough, who weren't on screen enough. And why? Is because they weren't being vulnerable. They weren't showing up. And if you come from your head instead of your heart, you're going to stay in the same place. Your heart is waiting for you.
Yeah.
And we're waiting for you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Fritzi. I enjoyed talking to you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Julius. It's a really great conversation.
And we'll stay in touch. I love that.
Yeah.
And
call me back
if I can help. And I'll follow up also with the material that I'll dissect and put together based on this interview and the other research.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, and have a beautiful day, and good luck with your community engagement later.
Thank you, Julius.